and social workers have been engaged in those, and there are ways for you to engage in those processes across all three branches of government.
All right. Well, thank you for having us here, Charles. Really excited to get the
And
podcast
social
off
workers
the ground here.
have been
Oh, we're getting
engaged.
a little feedback there. Okay, feedback's gone. That's great. Again, I'm Justin Hodge. I'm a clinical associate professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, and I'm the faculty lead for our policy and political social work pathway, which is the concentration for students that want to focus on policy and political engagement. I'm also a Washtenaw County Commissioner. I represent the southeast corner of Washtenaw County for those viewers at home that know Washtenaw County geography. I represent most of Ypsilanti Township and all of Augusta Township. And as Charles mentioned, I'm the board president for the Social Work Democracy Project, and really happy to be able to do all of the policy and political work that I'm doing now. But I actually started my career as a clinical social worker, and I'm sure that'll come up in some of the conversation today, because one of the core things that we're trying to engage social work students and professionals across the country in is that, there is something for every social worker to do within the political arena. Whether you're a clinical social worker, or you're doing community organizing, or you're doing program evaluation, there is something for you to do. And a lot of what we want to do with the Social Work Democracy Project is help you figure out what space there is for you that fits into your life and fits into the time that you have available to you. So looking forward to a great discussion tonight.
Okay, so again, I apologize for our glitches. We're actually live on YouTube now as well. Uh, so one distinction I do want to make at the onset is that I agree with you that all social workers need to be engaged, civically engaged and engaged in politics or on some level. But I tonight I want to focus specifically on those who are doing this, actually, either employed or spend the vast amount of their time in a legislative office, uh, in the executive branch, in federal agencies, because the point that I'm trying to make is that the knowledge that we gain through those experiences are invaluable. And if we don't have that knowledge, we're not as effective as we can be. So I just want make that clarification. Uh, I'm not saying you're wrong there, Justin. I'm just saying I would just so tell us what do you actually do as a county commissioner?
Yeah, I was interested when we were backstage. You said you weren't necessarily sure what I was doing since you know me longer than I've been in an elected office. So as a county commissioner, we're the legislative branch for county government. So I'm effectively a legislator. And the in Michigan, you can have different forms of county government. And so and across the country. So in some states or in some counties, even in the same state, you might have a county government that has a county executive, which would be an elected official. So that person runs for office, and you could look at that person as sort of like the equivalent of the mayor, but for the county. So that person would be the chief of the executive branch. Either way, you're going to have county commissioners. In Washtenaw County, we don't have a county executive. What we have instead is a county administrator, and that person is running the day-to-day operations of the county government and is hired by the Board of Commissioners to do that, which creates interesting dynamics in that I think more so when you have that structure versus the one where you have a county executive, sometimes the commissioners get into the role and in the lane of some things that could be sort of like the executive branch, because we work so much closer with administration than you would under a structure that has a county executive that has their own team and is their own elected person, versus this model where we have an administrator that's hired by the Board of Commissioners. So we're three main responsibilities for county commissioners are to pass the county budget, create policy for the county, and provide constituent services. So for people that are looking to engage or need support from the county. Because the county provides a lot of human services. That's one of the main reasons actually why I ran for county commissioner, is because in Michigan, at least, county government is one of the human service driven forms of government. So community mental health, our public health department, community and economic development, those are all services that we provide at the county level. So if you're a resident and you're seeking services from the county, or you're just looking to learn more, you would reach out to me and my team to be able to better assist you with that.
Now, who's on your team?
Well, we don't have a ton of people. So the Board of Commissioners in Washtenaw County, unlike Wayne County, so people that, if you know Michigan geography, Detroit's in Wayne County. The Wayne County Commissioners, they have that other form of government that I mentioned where they have a county executive, but each of their county commissioners individually have their own team of roughly 2 or more staff people. And in Washtenaw County, we don't. We collectively, all of the commissioners share a small team of staff people. So not many, but they stay very busy. It's, I think, challenging to work for an elected official, and it's challenging to work for 9 of them. And sometimes we have competing interests.
And so what determines where you put your focus in terms of there's so many issues that you have to address. How do you how do you decide, or how do you prioritize the work that you do?
Yeah, so for me, a lot of that comes from my values as a social worker, and wanting to make sure that we're trying to create a Washtenaw County where everybody has the opportunity to thrive and be successful. And a lot of that is also represented through the needs of my constituents. So when I think about, so we have 9 county commissioners, we each represent different parts of Washtenaw County. So we're going to have very different needs between the 9 commissioners. For example, I represent a district that is a primarily urban township. I also have a very rural township, but there are other commissioners that have just all rural areas. Washtenaw County is actually more rural than people realize. I mean, we have Ann Arbor in the center, which is very urban. But it's like a circle around Ann Arbor is very rural. So for me, when I think about what do I want to prioritize, a lot of it is helping to try to address the challenges specific to my district and challenges that are countywide. So for me, I've been really focused on addressing health inequity issues. So we see pretty significant differences in health outcomes, including life expectancy between people across our county. Give you an example, an African-American resident living in the Ypsilanti area, so in my district, can have a life expectancy up to about 7 years less than a white resident in the Ann Arbor area. So addressing those kinds of health inequities has been a top priority of mine. Economic inequality has been something that I've been working to tackle as well. There are significant differences in household income across Washtenaw County. We have a lot of concentrated wealth and concentrated poverty in Washtenaw County. Washtenaw County is actually one of the most economically segregated regions in the entire country. So doing more work around trying to address that. And then safety concerns, gun violence is a significant issue in my part of the county. So working with residents to have more community focused and community based responses to gun violence and other community violence has been a top priority as well.
So before we get to answer I just want to ask you about the commission that you chair.
Oh yeah, okay. So I mentioned I'm very interested in addressing economic inequality. Our governor, Governor Whitmer, has appointed me to be chair of the State Commission on Community Action and Economic Opportunity, which has been a great opportunity for me to be able to take a lot of the work that we're doing in Washtenaw County and at the state level focus on coming up with recommendations to the governor's office on strategies for addressing economic inequality. A top policy, I'd say win of mine was getting us to start a countywide children's savings account program. So kids in Washtenaw County Public Schools get a savings account now for college or trade school or any kind of post-secondary education. We recommended to the governor's office that the state also engage in investing in a program like that, and they can look at Washtenaw County as a model for that. Right now, we're really spending a lot of time exploring strategies to addressing the housing affordability crisis that we're seeing, not just in the state of Michigan, but all across the country, but coming up with some strategies to recommend to the governor's office to hopefully have her put it in her budget recommendation and then find investment to be able to try to make housing more affordable and to really combat homelessness.
Now, you said you didn't start out as a policy or political social worker. You started out as a clinical social worker. Well, I have the same story. I started out as a clinical social worker, got licensed, was seeing clients, and then I decided that I would follow the policy. I got bitten by the policy bug in one of my classes, and I'm saying, oh, I think this is an area that I like the to I prefer to be in, and so I applied to Columbia and got into the PhD program, and so it's been policy ever since. And now it's not only policy, it's more it is political. And I recall when I taught policy courses and as well as research and data analysis at Howard University School of Social Work for a number of years. I was too busy trying to make the world a better place that I didn't write enough articles to get my tenure. And so, former Congressman Ed Towns, who I had known when I was in Brooklyn, offered me a job on the Hill. And so I went on the Hill. And I remember when I was transitioning from Howard, from academia to take a job on the Hill, I thought, well, I guess I'm leaving social work and going into politics because I really at that time had not made the connection between the two, uh, and the rest is history. So, Angelique, tell us a little bit about your story and how you got into the political arena.
Absolutely. I know I started out, I wouldn't say it's clinical work, it was more case management work. I was a Title IV-E Child Welfare Scholar. Most schools of social work have a Title IV-E Child Welfare Workforce Recruitment Program. And so I was part of that. And so made my commitment upon graduation to work in child welfare. And my first job was Child Protective Services. And as I was doing case management, I experienced, seeing different clients having the same challenges, and I would have to jump through red tape over and over again for different clients. And there was a pattern of similar experiences and similar challenges across these families that were being investigated by Child Protective Services. And so when you see patterns happening over and over again, it's not an individual or client problem. It is a system problem. And so understanding that, aside from my own personal lived experiences in the system, really inspired my interest in wanting to focus in macro level practice. And as a macro social worker, partnering with my clinical colleagues was critical. As a lobbyist, a lot of the priorities that we work on are based on what our clinical colleagues are telling us based on the patterns that they see on their caseloads in their private practices, or community-based practice if they're at a community-based level. And so that's where some of the best policy ideas come from. And so I would say my success as a lobbyist was keeping close relationships with the direct practice world, because they really identified what the major areas of concerns are that legislators should be paying attention to. And so being close to the field has been a primary strategy for me from when I first started working as a lobbyist. And I started that about 2 years post MSW is when I got into lobbying, and was in it, until I finished my PhD program. And I worked in Michigan, just like Justin, for a private nonprofit legislative advocacy organization. And I was responsible for that organization's child welfare agenda and their secondary education portfolios. And had great success. And I worked across Republican governors and Democratic governors. And regardless of political affiliation of the administration that was in charge, there were things related to the social work field and social welfare that resonated with leadership in both parties. And so it was figuring out what that was and finding the champion to be able to move that work forward. So as a lobbyist, I experienced a lot of great joy in being able to move and pass legislation at the state level. in both the education space and the child welfare space during my time working as a lobbyist, and then continued those relationships when I was a professor um, at Wayne State for the time period I was there before as you say, oh, it's hard work and academia is hard, and I got a little burnt out and missed being in the policy day-to-day work, and so I ended up transitioning to Congress and working in the federal body. And at least Michigan, because of Michigan has a full-time legislature, and moving to the federal level where there is a full-time legislature, I saw a lot of similarities between the state legislative work I did and the federal legislative work. And so I was really able to jump in very quickly, having worked in that full-time legislative space before, and did a lot of work with the Ways and Means Committee. And in that capacity, my portfolio was exclusively child welfare, and worked with my office and partnered with other offices, again, both Republican and Democrat, to move child welfare legislation, and had some success
So
at the federal arena. Mhm.
so let me ask you, so what did you learn by being in the congressional office that you did not know before you got there?
I think, the different issues are different. If you're looking at state-specific priorities and interests versus federal, where you're thinking about your office and the constituent-specific issues. But my member that I worked for was also in leadership in a committee. And so although he had to be very attentive to the issues of his specific constituency, because of committee leadership, he also needed to care about that from the perspective of the whole country. And so my job wasn't only digging in and understanding what the needs were of his constituent base, but I also spending a lot of time building relationships with national lobbying groups or federal lobbyists in the field of child welfare, and understanding that issue, not just from Illinois, because I worked for Danny Davis in Chicago, but also how that issue was impacting other jurisdictions. And because of Danny Davis was a legislator that really did care about working across the aisle, that he was very conscientious about, in addition to my district, what are these similar issues happening in Republican districts in other states. And so he always wanted me to make sure that I was gathering data and research to support legislative introduction that was sensitive to not only Chicago, which was his constituency, but also other areas. And he did a great job and continues to do a great job working with his Republican colleague, whether he was in the majority or minority party, and being sensitive to what's going on in those jurisdictions, and being able to introduce legislation bipartisanly. That was always important to him, is working diligently to find a Republican co-sponsor. And child welfare is a very bipartisan issue. In Congress, there's a caucus called the Foster Youth Caucus, and about a quarter of all members of the U.S. House are members of that caucus. It's the largest caucus there. And so there's a lot of opportunity to really work across the aisle in that particular legislative portfolio.
So when I went to work for Mr. Towns on the Hill, right? I had been in a political office in Brooklyn, the borough president's office, but it wasn't really legislative. It didn't deal with passing laws, but it dealt with land use. So I was a novice. I mean, I had no idea about the committee, how committees worked. I didn't know what an amendment tree was. And maybe you did from the state, I
I
guess
did,
state
yeah.
amendment
Hmm.
trees as well. But to me, that was like an indifference curve if you were studying economics. It was really foreign to me. And so I'm saying these things are, if you have not experienced this, if you have not learned these things, you know, coming on the hill and trying to get something done is going to be really difficult until you know, actually experience something. I know I took an intensive week-long course on how Congress worked. The committees and all. I keep saying committees because they are
Yeah.
the most important piece. I even learned what the bells meant when the bells started ringing. Uh, so I'm just the point I'm trying to make is that you really don't know how to operate in some of these spaces until you go in the space and spend some time and learn the complexities that make it tick. So, Justin, have you learned anything since you've been an elected official?
I think I learned a few things. It's my 5th year in office here. And one of the things that you and I have talked about is that there are tons of great books. I got a lot of great books behind me, but there's only so much you can learn from just reading that. I was really excited to run for county commissioner. I didn't win the first time, but I was still excited to run again, and then I won, and then I won again, and I won again. So I'm just going to keep on winning. Uh, then I read a lot of books on the history of county government in Michigan, the role of the Board of Commissioners, just to really be as prepared as I possibly could be before I took office. And that was really helpful. And I'm glad that I did that because it gave me something to start from. But there's just so much more to learn that you have to just learn from the experience by being on the ground and getting that. Right. Like it's good to read the books to learn the facts of a lot of the situations, but what can't be captured in those ways and through those methods are the culture of the individual institutions and just what is it like to work with all of these different people with varying viewpoints, both other elected officials, but also the staff and the team that you have. So really, all of us are encouraging everybody watching this to find some way to get involved because you're going to get some valuable knowledge that you can't get in another way.
But did either of you have an aha moment when something that you discovered that you could that completely surprised you? I remember when I had this idea that we could get a bill introduced and hopefully pass. Well, every time you introduce a bill, most of the time you want the bill to pass. Sometimes you just introduce the bill so you can talk about it. But most people, want to get the bill passed. I had this idea that if we could give tax breaks to uh, people who supported or fund youth programs, then that would be a way to incentivize private investment and it seems so, logical to me, that I couldn't understand why it could not be done. And until I got the opportunity to talk to uh, Congressman Rangel's legislative director, and she kind of told me that it would not happen because of the possibility of fraud and tax fraud. I mean, you know, I still was thinking it's got to be a way to get around it, but there are some realities that exist that we may uh, have some other ideas about doing things, but these realities will dictate what can happen and what can't. And she directed me to a report from the Congressional Research Service that kind of spelled it out. And so that was that was one aha moment for me.
I know when I was first training when I was learning by being a lobbyist in the state of Michigan, one of the things during that training was understanding how, when you're thinking about bill development, thinking about unintended consequences. And what you described is exactly that. And so it's something, as you're doing policy analysis, that is an important part of the process, is understanding not only what the other side that doesn't like the bill, what is it about what they don't like, and understanding, those unintended consequences and what is at stake, and is that going to actually cause more of a problem than your offered solution. So those things are really important to think about. I know when I was developing my first bill, when I was in Michigan, I worked as a lobbyist with many other lobbyists in the state legislature on the subsidized guardianship bill, and it took 8 years to get from initial introduction from the first time to actually getting it signed into law was 8 years. So having that experience early on, I knew when I transitioned from state government to Congress that I wasn't going to have miracles happen in my fellowship year as a legislative staffer, and that the success of working on the bill development process is that introducing a bill in and of itself is not the win. I think so many people think that if you get a bill introduced, that's a major win, and it is exciting to see something you've worked on be introduced. But it's important for folks that understand the political process that bill introduction is only the first step, and that there are many more steps that have to happen before a bill can be signed into law. And that that you have to consider political feasibility in the current climate, and understanding what is that moving train that might be happening that you can connect your bill to, and that was similar both in my experience in the state and at the federal government. And that there was a moment where kinship care was getting a lot of attention in Michigan, and that's when we found the right moment to get that bill actually passed and signed into law. And that I would say at the federal law at the federal level, there's that same thing of, what are the crises? What is being covered in the news? What is it that people are talking about, a lot, in social media, and how does the efforts that you're working on connect to those conversations? And that when you can jump on those moving trains, you can have a little bit more success in not just having a bill introduced, but to actually getting a committee hearing on it, and moving it through the process until it becomes law.
So I want to shift the focus a little bit and talk a little bit about research, because many of the policy focused uh, people in our profession are academics, and they do research. And so uh, I want to just talk about how research interacts in these legislative settings, because I think at times people think you could just, do your research, your findings might be significant, right? And so you say, "Oh, I got something to show here," and you want to take it to the Hill and say, "Look, this is what I find, and can you guys use it?" All right, and that doesn't necessarily, that's not the best way to get that into the conversation. So first, let me ask Justin, because I'd imagine at your level, there's not a whole lot of research involved in your deliberations, or am I wrong?
I mean, I think it depends. I'd say that comes up a lot for us because we're so close to the University of Michigan. So we end up engaging with researchers from the University of Michigan on a number of issues that we're trying to tackle, because they're also trying to tackle some of those same issues in the local community. I'll give you an example. Pointing at that book right there, right, written by Willie Elliott. Willie Elliott is a tenured faculty. He's the director of our PhD program at U of M. And he's one of the leaders in children's savings account research. Wrote the book on it right there. And we worked closely together before I got elected and after I got elected around trying to design and get the children's savings account program for Washtenaw County kids that I mentioned. And it wasn't just him, Trina Shanks, and there were other researchers involved with that too. So just figuring out ways to try to translate the effectiveness, like the research that they had come up with, and trying to do effective program design was a challenge. And it took us years to be able to get to the point where we're at now. And the program is very successful. And there are many kids in the accounts, and there's been more than totally across all of the accounts, more than $1 million across all of the accounts at this point. But the challenge is the research says one thing, and like that may be the best way to do it or best practice based on the research. But then you also have to think about the political realities and how do you get more people involved. So I'd say research comes into play probably at every level of government, but especially, if you're in a local or a county government near a big research institution, you're going to still be involved with researchers and figuring out ways to try to translate what is a really, really good research, but then how do you make that real policy?
And Angelique, you are a researcher.
Yeah, and I would say because I was a lobbyist before I was an academic, one of the things, when I observed being in committee hearings as a lobbyist, sitting in the room when researchers would come to present to elected officials at the state, and I would say this is also something to consider at the federal level, is that being researchers, want to bring every single thing to prove their point on many pages of script. And when we write a research article, our journal wants between 20 and 30 pages of data, which is the opposite of what elected officials want, where if you can do something in 1 or 2 pages, that is the preference. So understanding how to speak to elected officials is important to being successful in translating research for the political arena. So that's really important. I remember as a young lobbyist sitting in a hearing, and I remember there was actually a researcher from the University of Michigan who got called in to testify, and she brought in, let me tell you, like a stack of articles that she had written on a particular topic, and she brought them all, and she made copies for all of the people, all of the elected officials, and she did her testimony, and she left, and after the hearing, 90% of those elected officials threw those giant piles of paper out on their way out the door. And I remember overhearing one elected official whisper to another elected official going, "Why do people think we have time to read all this stuff?" And so I think part of the key of being a successful researcher is understanding how to write specifically for a political audience. And one of the other things that I do as a researcher is that it's not about me, picking on things that I'm really excited about and trying to convince an elected official to also care about it. But I have regular conversations with elected officials to understand what is the hot topic, what is it that you need research on. And so I have really made my career as a researcher by being attuned and allowing policymakers to inform and dictate my research agenda. So I'm a child welfare researcher. I stay in that lane, but I go to elected officials who are on the committee that does child welfare work, and I ask them, what is it that you all are talking about? What is it that you need to do your work? And then I bring those ideas to my research team and go, okay, y'all, let's figure out how to answer these questions that these researchers need to have access to. And so I feel like I've had great success in having a lot of my research actually informing bills and having bills actually signed into law based a lot on that. And it's really not me fighting researchers to get them to take my ideas, but it is seeing myself as being a researcher in service to elected officials and really catering my research agenda to what they want research on.
That point was made at a recent conference we did in January, leading up to the Society for Social Work and Research annual meeting. We did a half-day seminar at the University of Washington School of Social Work called it an Innovation Day, sponsored by Wellbeing and Equity Innovations and CRISP and the University of Washington School of Social Work. And a number of points were made about how to incorporate the voices of lived experience who bring a whole different perspective to that. And even to, like you say, talk to the legislators prior to doing your research, prior to developing your research questions, because your research questions can now be more you know, geared to focus on the outcomes that you want to focus on. And there is a video of that conference on the CRISP website. So if you're interested in seeing how your research can be more influential in these legislative and political spaces, you might want to go and take a look. All right, so let's shift one more time. But before, I just want to remind everyone that March is Social Work Month, and happy Social Work Month to everybody who's listening. And we annually do events on the Hill, the Congressional Research Institute for Social Work and Policy. We'll be doing our annual Social Work Day on the Hill on Wednesday, March 26th. You can go on our website, www.crispinc.org to get more information. It's going to be a wonderful event. And then the following day, we'll do our Student Advocacy Day when we bring students to the Hill to help them engage with congressional offices, because that's how you really get interested. So one way of getting your foot in the door, so to speak, is internships. All right, so I want to talk about the importance of internships in terms of just taking those first steps towards being not only a political social worker, but even a legislator. Anybody want to chime in?
I think that's really important. It's a way to learn the process. As you heard from Justin and myself, you can't really read how to do this in a book. That can only go so far. So those lived experiences are absolutely critical. I know when I worked both as a lobbyist, I took interns. I take interns as a researcher who translates research for the political environment. And when I worked for Congressman Danny Davis, we regularly took interns in our office. In fact, I will say that I don't think Congress can actually run without interns. The House has a much smaller budget than the Senate. And there's very few staff. So even at the federal level, when I worked for the congressman, there were only 7 staffers for his entire portfolio. And so we relied heavily on interns to answer phones, sit in constituent meetings, help subsidize, the time needed to really dive and do research to inform bill development processes. And I know that I would have been very challenged if I did not have interns in my office to support the work. I think they play a critical role in the political social work process. And I think students oftentimes don't realize the power that they can gain very quickly through engaging in those types of experiences. I maintain interns to this day because I saw how valuable interns were in my work as a lobbyist, in my work on the Hill. And I'm one of very few faculty who take on field students as a regular part of what I do in the school. And my students are critical to my ability to be able to be a responsive researcher, because the Hill is not going to wait 7 years for you to conduct a study to be able to use it, right? You have to be able to respond in pretty tight deadlines. And faculty are managing teaching, managing research, managing service at the university level, state level, national level. And so for me, having field interns is a critical way to be able to be responsive to the field. And in this case, I'm talking about elected officials and their staffers.
I'd say similarly, it's fantastic to have students doing their field placements in political offices or government offices, so they can get that experience and they can do it from a social work perspective, because then they have to apply all of the social work competencies to the work that they're doing here. So some of our students are in state legislative offices. We've got students that are in we're in some federal departments, not so much right now, and city council spaces. And I've taken field students before too. So it really does help illuminate much of what Angelique and I have been talking about. Uh-oh, it says my microphone is breaking up. I'm just going to finish this off then. Just so you can get that hands-on experience without having to read about it.
Okay, so another point I wanted to make is that if you talk to a lot of elected officials, particularly people in Congress, they will tell you that they started as an intern. Okay. Barbara Lee was an intern to Ron Dellums. She ultimately became his chief of staff, and then she went on to become a congressperson. And so there are so many examples of how that first experience can lead to the next, and then the next. It doesn't work for everybody, and then one of the things, with internships are, if for social workers, it's like doing your practicum in a legislative office, that there is a education plan. So they don't just get stuck with, the menial task, that there has to be some, design to involve them in, even if it's lit reviews or, different things that's going to help them, letting them sit in on committee hearings and otherwise getting some education out of it. So I'm a big proponent of social work students taking those opportunities. When I was on the Hill, before I went on the Hill, actually, when I first started teaching at Howard University, I had a chance meeting with Danny Davis's chief of staff at the time, and he asked me if I would be on a state of the African American male panel that Mr. Davis was putting together. And I said, sure, I'll be on your panel if you take a couple of my students in your office. And so we made that exchange. And so while I was at Howard, I was placing students in Danny Davis's office. And then we were placing students in other office, Barbara Lee's office. And so when I got on the Hill, naturally, I started putting students in our office from the school of social work. And so many of those students actually, they may not have gotten to be elected officials, but they did go on to careers that's in policy and politics. So I'm a big proponent of having social work students do their practicum in legislative offices and legislative settings. And obviously for me, it's Congress. So I mean, I really have a beef, because when I went on the Hill in 2010 and we formed the Social Work Caucus, the Congressional Social Work Caucus, there were a dozen members of Congress who were social workers. All right. Now we have two. All right. So if we believe that uh, social workers need to be in Congress, then I believe we have to create a pipeline to get more social workers into Congress. And I believe that pipeline begins with getting more students into these offices doing their practicums. In fact, I have a student now, Deja Westerfield, who is completing her practicum in Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia's office. Uh, because I asked the when the Congresswoman became the chair of the caucus, I asked her if we could place a student there, and she was amenable. Now, I know it's getting those internships, field placements on the Hill is tough because they're very desirable. Everybody wants to put their kid in a congressional office because it is a very valuable experience and it looks wonderful on your resume and it will help you to get a job. So those are very coveted uh, positions, and so they're not readily available to our students. But all these Congress people have district offices. All right. So my thinking is if you can't do your field placement on the Hill, then there's got to be a district office somewhere near your school. And even if you're doing remote learning, then there's a district office of your congressperson near you. And so I am proposing that we start putting or encouraging or directing or however you want to do it, more social work students in I almost said field placements, which that term is no longer correct, but to have their practicums in district offices. And while you may think that the experience is different being in a district office, but you can still have some of the same educational opportunities, maybe not exactly the same as being on in person, but all the hearings now are practically virtual. So you can always do a hearing. And so you craft a lesson plan, all right, for that student that will permit them to have a valuable experience. So there, I'm making my plug. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say in addition to congressional offices, interns are also valuable in executive branch for administrative policy positions. It is also the same thing, a great way to work your way up into permanent executive branch positions and actually both state and federal. Many of those interns, I would say the vast majority of them end up in permanent positions after being an intern first in the executive branch. You're more likely to get that to stay than not, actually, has been my experience. And so the administrative policy-making experience through the executive branch that works hand in hand with the legislature is also a very important and powerful policy opportunity. We tend to have more social workers in the executive branch naturally. And of course, we know that social workers are also uniquely positioned to do that work in a good way.
Absolutely. And what about social workers at the local level?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's similar in that case. Is my mic working better now, or coming in
Yes.
clear? Yeah, great. Yeah, I mean, we see that in state legislative offices or in executive branch for the state government here in Michigan. I've got a ton of former students that work for county government because many of them did their field placement or practicum in county government and have stuck around since then. So I mean, civil service is the way to go. Like, we can't give up on civil service.
Okay, well, there's a lot more we can talk about, and then we will be back and with more conversations about social workers in these spaces and doing other things in policy. We have a LinkedIn group called Chris Pals, Chris Political Advocacy Leaders, and we've asked people to join who are interested in being more engaged in legislative settings and doing advocacy around issues that are important to us. But before we close, I just want to say a little bit about our social work democracy project, which is still in a nascent stage because our illustrious leader, Dr. Eddie Uhura, was sidelined for a while, but she's back, and we're looking to get more engaged. But back in 2018, Nancy McLean, a historian at Duke University, wrote a book called Democracy in Chains, and it moved me and several people who I recommended to read the book. And we raised the question during one of our Social Work Day on the Hill events: can social work help save democracy? I didn't say can social work save democracy, but what can we do as social workers or as a profession to to help preserve, strengthen what democracy we have left. I said to my colleagues before we went on, we didn't want to get into a discussion this evening regarding the current administration and all of the I don't know, you pick your adjective, stuff that's going on coming out of the White House on a daily basis, because that could consume our conversation. However, we have to be concerned about threats to our democracy that we're seeing. And again, this is something that we're going to have some conversations about in terms of what social workers can do to help save democracy. What should we be thinking about? What should we be critically considering in terms of how do we position ourselves? How do we engage our students? Because a lot of times they're looking to us for some ideas. Any thoughts on that, Mr. President, Board President?
Well, I mean, we're going to be like we talked about. How about now?
Okay.
I don't know. We're going to be rolling out toolkits like we talked about before. Educational toolkits for schools of social work to be able to use to educate students and faculty and staff on ways in which social workers can be engaged in democracy. And then, the podcast is one of the key things that we've talked about too. So hopefully we'll be able to get some traction with both of those this year.
I think certainly role modeling is a great thing to do. So I think social workers need to see their mentors in action, right? Social workers, as part of our ethical responsibility, we have a commitment to social justice. And so I think we all have to be asking ourselves, what does that mean for us? What is our opportunity to do that? And as faculty, especially tenure track faculty, they are a protected group of social workers, who are uniquely positioned to be role models in helping students understand, what social justice is and how they can be engaged. And that can happen at the university level institution. It can happen, through creating opportunities or joining students in, grassroots advocacy efforts. And I always tell, students and my colleagues that, engaging is so easy now because of technology. You can literally do it in your pajamas. So if you're listening in and you're in your pajamas, you're engaging in the movement. We make it very easy. You can send an email, send a letter. Most people aren't snail mailing letters to Congress anymore. They're doing it through the website. Those websites accept letters 24/7. So if you can't do it till 2 in the morning, you can do it at 2 in the morning. And so it is easy to take active steps to be an engaged practitioner, an engaged student, an engaged researcher, an engaged faculty member. And I think that, we have a duty as faculty to role model that for our students, so that they can see that process unfold and that those can become habits as a student and then carry on into their professional world after that. And I would love to see us do that more.
Yeah, I would say that there's more that we can do to combat unlimited money in politics. We can work on that issue, and we can promote things like ranked choice voting, which has been shown to uh, reduce polarization in areas that has been used. But we have to begin to think about what it is that we as social workers, because as you say, Angelique, we are mandated to be in that arena in the social in fighting for social justice. So let's put our thinking caps on, and we'll have some more conversations about this in the future. So I'd like to thank you, Angelique and Justin, for this conversation this evening, and to those of you who were able to stick with us. If not, this will be on demand and you'll be able to view it later.